Welcome to the Thin Places Travel Podcast, where we discuss places where the veil between this world and the eternal world is thin. I'm your host, Mindy Burgoyne.
There's all different elementals. You know, you have the little people, you have the nature spirits, you have the fairies, but they really let you know who they are.
Coming up, we'll hear from Carmel Costello, who will be talking about the healing energy of fairies. And later in the podcast, I'll talk about a fairy fort known as Doon Hill in Aberfoyle, Scotland. So today we're going to talk about fairies. Now, there are many concepts about fairies or beings of the other world. My only association with the word fairy as an American was the sort of Tinkerbelle image that you heard of in Peter Pan and in the fairy tales, Fairy Godmother of Cinderella or the Tooth Fairy. Fairies are good little angels. They're helpers. They're imaginary creatures that children soon realize are just a figment of the imagination made up to sort of enhance an experience, but they were always really for the good. But in the pre-Christian Celtic cultures, the concept of fairies was very different, and that concept still lingers today, even throughout the coming of Christianity. These beings were feared because they could curse you or bring you bad luck or create some kind of mischief in your life. You didn't mess with the fairies. You didn't disturb their domain or their wrath. You stayed away from fairy hills or forts. You didn't cut down lone hawthorn trees or bushes because they might be a fairy domain. And there's a well-known poem about fairies written by a man from County Donegal named William Allingham. And that poem describes this kind of concept or belief about fairies. Up the airy mountain, down the rushy glen, we daren't go a-hunting for fear of little men. That's the opening and the closing stanza of that poem. And another thing about fairies is they were known to steal babies and perhaps hold them for a long period of time, and then the baby would return. Or the baby would be changed out with a fairy changeling. So you raise this child and you begin to realize the child is very strange. And you surmise that it must have been changed with the fairies, that this isn't a real human child. And Allingham's poem kind of references that in another stanza. They stole little Bridget for 7 years long. When she came down again, her friends were all gone. And they have kept her ever since, deep within the lake, on a bed of flag leaves, watching till she wake. The hawthorn trees are also said to be associated with the fairies, or fairy trees, marking fairy forts, or perhaps the fairies live in the hawthorn trees. And all across Ireland, you'll see these hawthorn trees that have ribbons or tokens tied onto them, rags. And these are a sign of devotion to the fairies. Or they might be called a wishing tree, and people leave tokens behind for that. They're often found by holy wells. And not every hawthorn tree is marked that way, but there's enough of them that you'll catch them as you travel through Ireland, certainly. I remember talking to a farmer in West Cork about the hawthorn bushes and trees in the field and how farmers wouldn't cut them down because they were afraid of upsetting the fairies. And this very burly, big farmer said to me, "That's all nonsense. It's all superstition. None of it's true." And I said, "Do you have any hawthorn trees in your fields that are standing alone like that?" And he said, "Well, yes, I do." And I said, "Well, why wouldn't you cut them down?" And he said, "I don't believe in fairies, but I'll not be cutting the bush." So there's still a sense of apprehension in many people that you just don't mess with certain energy. And the hawthorn tree often marks that kind of space of energy or kind of a spatial energy. There's a really fun story about a hawthorn bush that was in the way of a dual-lane highway as it was being constructed near Shannon Airport. And somehow or another, the workers got in their head that it was marking a fairy fort, and none of them would cut it down. And so the management came and, strongly told them they had to clear the way and cut that thing down, and none of them would. And the management wouldn't. And eventually they just decided to reroute this dual lane highway around that bush. And you can still see it today, growing kind of in the median. So this kind of connection with fairy energy is very real. And there's a section in Allingham's poem that also talks about the hawthorn. It says, by the craggy hillside, through the mosses bare, they have planted thorn trees for pleasure here and there. Is any man so daring as to dig them up in spite? He shall find their sharpest thorns in his bed that night. To many people, especially in Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England, the energy of fairies is very real. And fairies are part of this communion of elemental beings that exist in a parallel realm or dimension. They would exist with the little people or the leprechauns. All of these non-human spirits sort of inhabit parallel realms, or that's the belief anyway. And one of our guests actually that we're going to hear from today actually works with the energy of the fairies and uses it in healing and holistic practices. And a little bit later in the podcast, I'm going to tell you about a fairy hill I traveled to last year in Scotland with my tour group that was quite remarkable. I'm so used to seeing little individual representations of fairies. That's a fairy hill, that's a fairy tree. This was an entire complex believed to be inhabited by the fairies, and we all had our own experiences. So stay tuned for that. Now we're going to hear from Carmel Costello, our guest for today. Carmel Costello is a spiritual healer and kinesiologist who grew up on a farm in County Kilkenny. And on that farm, Carmel developed a healthy sense of respect for nature and what it produces. After finishing school, she spent years in the catering industry and had her own restaurant. And in the year 2000, Carmel found herself working with adults who had learning difficulties. And it was from that experience that she developed her skill with energy healing. She says she always knew that she was different. She felt different energies outside herself. She felt other people's energy and energies in nature, in plants, in animals. And in 2007, she studied kinesiology for 2 years and received a diploma. In 2009, she completed her training in many energy therapies, such as Reiki, quantum touch, and magnified healing. At present, she works as a healer supported by the energies of the divine, the fairies, the little people, the nature spirits. This support came about once she acknowledged their presence and recognized that they had come to help. Carmel has felt the fairy energy quite strongly. She says they've guided her in many ways, specifically into making fairy houses as healing tools. She has a unique sense of the landscape and the layers of energy and elemental beings in the sacred landscape. And we're going to talk to her today about her energy healing and the fairies. Welcome, Carmel.
Great to be with you, Mindy. Thank you.
Carmel, what would you say if someone asked you what your concept of thin places was? How would you describe thin places?
Thin places. Well, I suppose to me what it means really is we're all energy and we all vibrate at a different level. And, places and things have energy. So it's really tuning in to another energy, basically. So that could mean we go to a rath or we go to a sacred site and we just be nice and quiet and just feel what is happening there. And it's connecting really with our senses. Mm-hmm. So we connect, through feeling, through sight, through hearing, through sound, in whatever way. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the landscape where you live there in Kilkenny? What's it like there?
Well, it's very green. I suppose most people would call Ireland very green, but we would have quite a luscious landscape here in County Kilkenny, mostly farming. Plenty of castles and old buildings, plenty of raths, but it would be quite a big farming community where I live.
And I just want to say the raths that you're referring to is RATH. Tell us what that means. What does that mean?
What does a ra mean? Well, for me, what a ra, I suppose there's all different, you have a lot of studies on ras, etc. But ras to me are like dormant well, a lot of them can be dormant to maybe a lot of people, where there is an underworld, and where a lot of these places will have portals to an underworld. So for me, that underworld is like fairy world. They say the two of the Danann, when they were conquered or whatever, they all disappeared into the Raths. That's where they hang out, basically. So for me, that's what a Ra means, connecting with the underworld.
The underworld. So a Ra would be like another phrase might be fairy fort. Or
a fairy fort, right. Exactly.
Okay, I get it. So a connection to another realm, Yeah, okay. And can you tell us about the one that's near where you live?
Well, the one where is near me is in it's in an area called Rath Bay. And they say it was the residence of Herman. And Herman was the son of Milesius. Herman was married to Ti, who was an Egyptian goddess. And she is buried actually in the hill of Tara. And Herman is buried here at the Ra in Rath Bay. The Milesians, Herman was the son of Milesius. And I suppose the Milesians, they conquered Ireland at one time or other. So they would have conquered Ireland, say the two of the Danann were the rulers of Ireland at that time. And they would have gone into battle with the two of the Danann. And they conquered Ireland. And that was probably around 2,000 years before Christ was born. So Herman then was the son of Milesius. And they say he resided here in Rath Bay. Yeah. And the two of the Danann, like when they were conquered, they all disappeared into these forts or raths.
And they're believed to be a mystical people. I mean, not just right, not humans, like sort of, yeah.
Not humans, yeah.
Right. Okay. So the site that Rath Bay, what is it? So that's the history of it. What is it like when you walk up to it, and what do you experience there?
Well, it's a nice big space. When you look at it, when I look at it, I look at it with awe, and I smile. Always, when I come across a Ra that is active or whatever, they just make me smile, and they make me giggle, and they make me laugh. It's quite imposing. I'm not sure of the dimensions now, but it has like a whole dike surrounded by a big dike, and it's by the River Nore. You walk in on one particular area, and generally before I walk into any Ra, I will always ask for permission, from the people that live there, be it fairies or nature spirits or whatever. And it has many hawthorn and blackthorn bushes. A lot of these will have the hawthorn and the blackthorn bush. And when I go in, I just sit in silence and connect with with the underworld, basically. And generally, my experience has been very, very good. Sometimes okay. When I walk in, especially with this Ra, I feel really, really good. I feel happy, I feel joyful, and I would often say that I'd love to do cartwheels, and that's how the energy makes me feel. Now, other places you could walk into, they don't necessarily have to be Raths, but I'm just giving an example of the different energy, where you could walk into and you might feel ill. You might just get that sick feeling or whatever. So when I go to the rath there, I generally meditate. In some other areas, if I do feel sick, I'll start doing the healing on that particular area, or heal whatever is need to be healed.
In the land.
In the land, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it's a joyful place. It's a very joyful place. It is, it wouldn't be hugely well known at the moment, but the history there is quite enormous.
Is it open to the public?
Oh, it's open to the public. Anybody can go. The lady who is the keeper, she has a wonderful holistic area beside it as well.
Oh, okay. Tell me, when people go to these places and they feel this special energy, and this is something that we hear from our guests a lot. We take people on tour to these sort of high energy places. Yeah. And when they get there, sometimes they can, we'll do little exercises, maybe dowsing or using a pendulum, or to help them sort of measure the energy or experience the movement of the energy. But one thing that they will ask is, okay, I feel this energy. I feel good, or I feel happy, or I feel sick, or however this makes me feel. I feel this way. I can sense the vibration. What do I do with that? What's the practical takeaway, or is there one, for visiting these sort of portals where you're walking in two worlds?
It depends on the energy. I suppose I'll just give you my experience. When I started experiencing the fairies, I didn't always live here where I live. I lived maybe 15, 20 miles away. And I did experience the fairies where I did live before, but not very, very strong. And I moved in with my partner here, and sometimes I would spend a weekend here. And I remember one particular weekend, I couldn't sleep, and I didn't realize there was a rath near here, and I just couldn't speak, or I couldn't sleep. And it was like the fairies, they were drumming, they were almost like tapping me, and I said, "Oh, okay, go away." I just didn't know what to do with the energy. And that was okay. I kind of sat with that, for a while after. And then I said, well, okay, they were trying to connect with me for a reason. So I did find out later that reason was for me to do some healing or to acknowledge them. So when I go there, I'd always bless them and thank them. And for me, that's huge. They will connect with me then in other ways. Like I make these fairy houses or whatever, and they had me making those. But, my biggest thing with them is to send healing if they need healing, and to do healing if they need healing. You will get 10 times back from them in your life when you do stuff like that. And it's really just, listening and going with the feeling that you feel in your gut and what to do. They come in a lot in my healing now when I do my healing with people. And I just love it because they come in for a reason. And, some of them will want that person to acknowledge, they may live on the land where there is a rath or whatever. And a lot of times they're not acknowledged, or they can be basically abused. The land can be abused. The raths can be tampered with, or part of them can be taken away. So they're not respected. So most of the time they look for respect.
Right. So I guess what I hear you saying is, in these places where the plant spirits or spirit of the land, this is, again, where language fails us. We could call them fairies. We could call them people of the she. We could call them Tuatha, but elemental beings that exist inside the landscape in an invisible realm. I guess what I hear you saying is that oftentimes the real practical need isn't to take something away necessarily, but just the recognition of these elemental beings is enough. That maybe you have something to offer there rather than something to take away from there. But and then I also hear you saying that if you do make that offering of recognition or blessing or healing, then you do get a return.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, when you say, for me, there's all different elementals. You have the little people, you have the nature spirits, you have the fairies, but they really let you know who they are. They're quite definitive and saying, look, I am of the fairy realm, or no, I'm the little people, or whatever. And for me, I suppose it's the connection with the fairies.
And so, can you differentiate what's the difference between the little people and the fairies and the plant spirits? And is there a definition?
I don't know.
Just pretend you're talking to a second grader.
Yeah. Well, do you see, I suppose when I do my healing work on people, they also, they come in. And besides the elemental realm, I'll have saints come in or whatever, or Buddha or whoever. But when the elemental realm come in, the fairies will say, we are the fairy world. And I can see what they look like and whatever. And the little people, I'll say, oh, okay, these are the fairies that are in. They'll go, no, we are the little people. This is what they tell me.
Mm-hmm.
I can't say any more. Maybe other people are different. So they are quite different energy. Mm-hmm. And the nature spirits, they're different energy. The nature spirits, they would be of the flowers or, the trees or whatever.
So you're just kind of meditatively or in your own, conscious, in your mind, this is where the communication happens. You sense it with your mind.
Yeah, but they will be, but they will tell me, like say the little people, no, we are. I will hear them clearly. We are the little people. Mm-hmm. So really it's connecting with your senses. Some people would feel, touch, hear, see. I will feel, touch, hear, see. Not all together, but at different stages you might feel or you might hear or you might see. And
And so tell us a little bit about your healing practices and how you bring that energy into the healing practice.
Okay, well, I am a healer and I'm a kinesiologist. So I suppose for me, kinesiology almost is clinical to a sense. Mm-hmm. But then we do tap into, say, the innate intelligence of who you're working with. Do you know what I mean? And for me, how I work in that, I work really with the physical body and the health of the physical body. And then, and that would mean like testing the organs or testing for sensitivities in the body, testing the organs to see what will raise the vibration of the organs, doing a lot of emotional release. But how I work with emotional release is really the healing. And the healing then, for me, can be totally mind-blowing. And I work with the energy, I suppose, of the elementals. I work with the energy of the divine. And really, I'm just the facilitator. I'm just the tool. So the energy is channeled through me from mostly divine. Mm-hmm. And that energy then helps to raise the vibration of the client and helps them to process whatever is happening with them, from an emotional level. Be them right. if they're depressed or whatever. But, we're affected by energy all the time. We can be affected by the energy of a place. We can be affected by the energy of people. We can be affected by the energy of technology. And, so that can all pull us down and make us feel tired or sick or whatever. So it's to try, my aim with people is to raise their vibration so that they can really start healing themselves then.
And so you raise their vibration through some type of energy work with your hands and your mind? Like Reiki?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I would have trained in a lot of energy therapies, Reiki, quantum touch, integrated energy therapy, but I always had the healing. And I didn't know. I remember when I was 16 years of age being in school and my hands were on fire. Not literally on fire, but they were so hot. And I just didn't know what is this? I didn't have a clue what it was. And so there were many, many instances, but later on in life, I realized what that was all about. And even for me, just to put a hand on somebody, they just felt better. You know, I felt, okay, that's lovely. Keep your hand there. But we're all healers, you know, and it's just really tapping into that, really.
So if you were to tell someone that was a beginner or somebody that really felt like they had this call to connect with that energy and be a healer, when they were going to a sacred site like this place near you, what would you tell them to tune into? What would if you could say, look, do these three things or be sensitive to these three things to begin that process of raising your vibration, what would you say?
Well, I suppose the first thing is to, you know, acknowledge where you are and be sensitive to the area that you're in. Be sensitive to the land. Be sensitive to the surroundings. Like everything vibrates at a level. So I suppose it's respecting where you are. Often when I go to a place, then I'll do a meditation and just sit nice and quietly. And then when I start feeling stuff, if I, you know, allow yourself to get into the feeling of that place. Like, as I say, you mightn't feel, you know, you might feel a bit ill or you might feel great. Or for me, if I feel very uncomfortable, I will start doing healing on the area and on the land. So I will call in the gods or the goddesses of wherever or whatever or whoever I work with and bless the land. And blessing is huge, you know, and sending love to where you are. That's huge. And remember, energy follows intent. So if you intend to send a blessing to an area, that's exactly what you're doing. If you intend to send love into the ground, that's exactly what you're doing. If that is your intention, it's not coming from your head. You know what I mean? It's coming more from your heart. And it's just to acknowledge what is happening with you and go with that.
Do you feel, what do you think about leaving things behind? You know, crystals or strands of hair or... Is that something that should be done, could be done, is beneficial to do? Is that more beneficial for the giver, or is there really a kind of welcomed reception with the elemental beings?
There is no right or wrong in anything. A lot of it is going with your gut. Sometimes I will take something from the Ra, but I will always ask. I'm just guided. You know, you need to take this or whatever. You need to have this. Very seldom that does happen. Sometimes, yes, if I have, I love leaving a crystal. That would be I'm very big into crystal energy. And sometimes I might leave a crystal. Other times I don't. I just do my whole love thing and blessing in the Ra. And they just love that. They really love that. And love to think that you respect them enough to do that. My gift to them would be a gift of a blessing or love. But they do love if people bring other stuff. It's like they're respecting, you know, people are respecting.
It's the acknowledgement.
They're acknowledging that they are there. And they do love that. But speaking of W.B. Yeats, I'm sure you've heard of him.
Right. Oh, yes.
Yeah. Well, you should check him out because he has written many books on fairies and fairy stories. An anthology of Irish cultural and political writing. So there's plenty of quotes from W.B. Yeats there. Back in 1890.
Yeah, well, definitely.
And he has written a lot on the fairies and a lot of old folklore stories and tales, etc.
That's great. Well, we will look at that. We'll definitely look at that. Is there anything else you want to say or let us know? Or
I can't think of anything else. Probably when I go off from you, say, I should have said that. I should have said that. But no, I love what I do, and I love my work. And oftentimes, this is another thing that came up earlier. If I'm tired, or, when you're sitting at home or you're doing your work or whatever, lucky enough, I can do this anyway. I'm not restricted to a time scale. I work within my own time. But if you're tired and really feeling lagging energy, I'd often just get into the car and just take off. And I just go with my gut to wherever I need to go. And you come across the most amazing places. And even just the trees, just the landscape. It doesn't have to be a sacred site as in particular, and it can be too. But like yesterday, I just took off. And we went off up a mountain, and I was really tired before I started. Everything was being lifted from me by the energy of the places that we drove through, and I came back feeling fantastic. So I do that, not a lot, but if I feel that I'm really, really tired, and it just shows that the vibration of wherever I was has changed the vibration in me and has upped the vibration. And cleared probably a lot of crappy stuff that I picked up, being in the wind park for a while. So that's one thing, great for people to do, or just get up and just go.
Great. Okay. Tell us about the products that you make.
Oh, yeah. Well, the fairies have me making these fairy houses. Can you see that?
I can see that. That's beautiful. So it's ceramic.
Yeah.
Or is it pottery? They're ceramic. Okay.
Yeah. So how these started about was I did a course in ceramics, which I had no intentions of doing. And after the second night, I started making fairy houses, which I had no intentions. But once I started making those, I could not stop. And it was like as if I was taken over. So eventually I needed a kiln. To make a very long story short, I talked to them and said, right, guys, I said, you want me to make these fairy houses? I need a kiln, and I have no money to buy a kiln. Or I might have, I had no money actually at the time to buy a kiln. So if you really want me to make this kiln, or to make these fairy houses, I could do with having a kiln. Within 10 days, I had a kiln, and I had it for nothing.
Wow.
And quite a big one. Yeah. So these are how they blew my mind. But I trusted that they would come up with whatever I needed if I was to go ahead with these.
And so what does somebody do with these fairy houses? And now I will get a picture of one to put on the website, but they're beautiful little, that look just like what a fairy house would look like. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, they're tea lights as you put a light in it?
You put a light into it.
Oh, okay.
You can put the little fairy lights or the tea lights, but they're healing tools, really. And really, I'm putting the fairies are allowing me to put the fairy energy into these houses.
I see.
So that's what they are. They're healing tools. A lot of people who seem to buy them would be people who really do connect with the land. A lot of healers, they see the energy, they feel the energy in them. But what really delights me, I do fairs from time to time, and I just love. You'll find somebody is coming in and they look very, very stern and could look troubled or whatever. And next thing they look at one of these and their whole face changes. And for me, that's just magic, And to see, especially grown men, I'm always intrigued. Grown men, they'll buy them and they'll buy them for themselves.
Right.
So they are healing tools, and they're healing for your house or your home or your garden, or just healing for yourself.
And what else do you, what other products do you have? Don't you have cosmetic products?
I do. I'm very much into natural products. So I make my own goat's milk soap. I make body butters and lip balms and sometimes body scrubs.
Okay.
And and they're all part. Again, I channel the energy of the divine into those. And so they're all part of my work. They're part of my healing work, I suppose, really.
Carmel, how can people find you? What is your website address?
www.kinesiologyandme.com. You can also find me on Facebook, Carmel's Fairy Houses. That's CARMELS, Fairy
Okay.
Houses. You can find me with the Fairy Houses on that. And I have a kinesiology page as well as Kinesiology and Me. And my private page, Carmel Costello.
Okay.
Yeah. And all my contact details are on all of those, telephone number or whatever. Or if you want to tune in energetically, I may pick it up too.
Oh, tune in energetically. I've got to work on that. That's awesome. Well, we'll make sure we put all of those in the show notes if anybody wants to reach out. Well, I want to thank you for joining me today, and blessings to you.
The fairy blessings to you, Mindy. Have a good day.
And thanks again for being with us, Carmel. And as a segue to Carmel's segment there about the fairies, I'm going to talk about the Fairy Knowe, also known as Doon Hill in Aberfoyle, Scotland. So this is a place that the public can visit. It's an enchanted hill. Now, Aberfoyle is about 30 miles north of Glasgow, near it's near Loch Lomond. It is in the Trossachs National Park, kind of central Scotland. And the fairy stories associated with Doon Hill came from a folklorist and minister named Robert Kirk. He was born the son of a minister in 1644, and he was the seventh son. He is said to have the gift of second sight. You know, there was this theory about, or belief about, women building up magic in their wombs as they gave birth to sons. And by the time a seventh son came, that magic was sort of ripe and imparted. It was imparted to the child. And when he came into the world, he would have this unusually developed psychic capability known as the second sight. And Robert Kirk was the seventh son. He also became known as the fairy minister. He's mostly known today for, even though he did a lot of great things. He was one of the first to translate the Bible into Gaelic. He was educated, even though he came from a very poor family. His father was also a minister. But he is most known for communing with the fairies on Doon Hill. So if you can imagine this landscape, Aberfoyle is a tiny, small little village. And there was a church with a churchyard. And then just across the road, up a bit, was the manse where Robert Kirk lived. The minister would live in the manse. And evidently, Robert Kirk would take long walks, and he would walk up to the top of Doon Hill, which was just literally across from his manse and church. And on these long walks that Robert Kirk would take up Doon Hill, he was communing with the fairies that lived there. Eventually, he wrote his experiences down. He wrote his experiences with the fairies down somewhere between 1691 and 1692, and he died in the process of writing these things. And about over 100 years later, Sir Walter Scott discovered the writings, and he published the writings under the title The Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns, and Fairies by Robert Kirk. And you can still get a copy of that text today. But in his writings, Kirk describes the nature of fairies, their culture, the way they look, how they appear, what their language is like. He describes fairies as said to be of middle nature between man and angel. He said they were intelligent, fluidous spirits, with light changeable bodies, that they were somewhat of the nature of a condensed cloud, and they were best seen at twilight. That's just some of the descriptions. But on one of his nightly walks up Doon Hill, Kirk disappeared, and no one could find him. Many say that he was whisked away by fairies and held captive. They were upset because he was writing down their secrets, and they didn't want those secrets exposed. Some also say that he went to Doon Hill. He was found in his nightshirt. He evidently fell into a kind of swooning state, wasn't dead, but he was brought home and then died. There's so many possible accounts of what happened to Robert Kirk, but the general consensus was that his spirit is held captive in the fairy world, that if it is separated from his body, it's held captive. If it's not, and his body really isn't in the grave there in the churchyard, that it's somewhere in the fairy world. there was an incident. Why do we think this? Why did they think he was whisked away and held captive? The reason is because there was an account of, maybe several accounts of people seeing him after the funeral. And one that really has lasted over the ages is an account where Robert Kirk appeared to someone who told this person that he was being held captive by the fairies, and that the only way he could be released was if this person would tell his relation, a relation named Graham, that he, Kirk, would be attending Graham's yet-to-be-born son's baptism. And at the moment of his appearance, Graham was to throw an iron knife or a dirk directly over top of Kirk's head, and that ritual, at the baptismal ritual, would release him from captivity. And Kirk did appear at the baptism, according to Graham. But Graham was too frightened by the vision and by the recourse of the fairies to throw the dirk. And so Robert Kirk, the man with second sight, just sort of faded away, forever to be known as the minister of the fairy queen. People believe that his soul is trapped inside the tall Scots pine that's at the top of Doon Hill. This tree is known as the minister's pine. So that's the mystery that sort of shrouds Doon Hill and the story of Robert Kirk. Robert Kirk's old manse still sits across from Doon Hill and just beside the graveyard, which is said to have his body. Well, it does have its marker, but whether or not his body is below that marker is still a mystery. Doon Hill is now known as the Fairy Knowe, and that's Knowe, K-N-O-W-E, and Fairy Knowe is a Scottish term. You heard Carmel use rath or rath as the dwelling place of fairies, and in Ireland that's usually a hill, but not necessarily a hill covered with a woodland. A Fairy Knowe typically is a small hillock that's often wooded with mature deciduous trees. And there's also usually some type of archaeological feature on the hill. Like it might be a stone slab, or it might be a well, or as on Doon Hill, it's that tree, the minister's pine. But fairy knowes are believed to be entrances into a mystical realm, a kind of private domain for the fairies, and they're fiercely protected by the beings that occupy them. And these places are especially active during liminal times, like dawn and twilight. We visited the Fairy Knowe, which is Doon Hill, last year with a group, and I was so excited to follow this path and see what it was all about. I wish I had known more I wish I had known more when I made the trip, because what I was seeing would have meant so much more to me. It's not a huge hill or a mountain. It's just a little rise in what's a typically flat landscape, and not quickly noticed. But it is also a little bit unusual in that Doon Hill has a little cap on top of it. If you look at it from the manse, say, and you look across the field at the hill, you notice that there's a little bubble, or almost like a nipple on the very top of the hill. And that bump is the minister's pine. It's that tall tree that sits at the top. The pathway going up to the top is very clearly marked. It's a clear trail. It does incline, though, when you're going up the hill, so you need to be a little fit to get up that. It begins as a slow wind around the base of the hill, and there's a little stopping place before the path gets too steep. And in that place, there is a fairy cottage that someone has carved out of an oak stump. And when I say stump, I mean the stump is taller than a man. It's probably 6.5 feet high. It's an old oak tree that has been perfectly carved to make a very tall fairy house. It's complete with doors and windows that have little panes and shingles on the roof and a chimney, and it sits in an oak grove, and all around it are small oak saplings. So you get the feel that you're really in a very sacred spot. And the effort that someone took, this is a stump that's rooted into the ground. It was once a tree. To carve such a thing, just seeing that work of art is pretty amazing. People have left tokens there at the fairy cottage, little crystals or stones or objects, coins. They're all around this house. They're They're set in the window sills or in the doorways or on little ledges or all around the base. And lots of people have pushed coins into the stump. So this is a practice where you take a coin and maybe with your shoe or a rock, you hold it up on its side and pound it into the wood of the tree, or in this case, the stump. And that's a way of leaving a token behind. And if you look on this fairy cottage, these coins are all over it. They're just lines of them going all around it in rows and rows, half embedded coins in the wood. And they're the reminders of the fairy pilgrims who stop at this little fairy cottage and pay homage to the fairies. There's another stump that's also been carved into a large mushroom. So the stump itself has been carved where the base looks like it's a table for a very large mushroom that's like the size of a basketball. It's big. And again, the coins have been pushed into it in rows, and they're half visible. And when you get to the top of the hill, the minister's pine is very evident. It's right in the middle of a clearing, a flat clearing, and it is covered with ribbons and flags and rags and notes and all kinds of tokens that you could tie on this thing. And there are similar tokens around surrounding areas. There are clusters of sticks and piles of wood that are shaped into sort of little works of art, similar to what you would find like when people build cairns out of stones to kind of leave there as they go. There are those kinds of structures all around the minister's pine. And there are cluties and tokens and other trees in that clearing. What was especially moving when I was there was there was a group of children who had made wishes and written them down on paper and put them, tied them onto the fairy trees, and you could read them. And there was one little one that just said, "More Legos," and another one that said, "I wish for a cupcake every Monday." So this is a powerful spot, and people are naturally quiet there. And I shot a little video near the fairy cottage, just of my group and what the environment looked like. And I got this little dancing green light in the lower portion of the screen. And I thought, what's that? And so I moved the phone, I was taken with my cell phone, away from where that was happening back to the fairy cottage, and the little green thing went away. And then I moved it again to this other region. And not only did the little green thing dance in the lower part of my camera, but it also had a sound. It synchronized perfectly. The sound was probably a bird, but it was synchronized perfectly with the dancing of this little green dot. So that was my little event of mystery when I went up Dune Hill. It is definitely a high energy site, and you can feel that vibration as soon as you enter the woodland. Dune Hill is a worthy visit for people who love thin places. And I've included links to the routes, the walking routes that go up the hill in the show notes, as well as a link to the book by Robert Kirk. So that's it for now. I want to thank you for listening to the Thin Places Travel Podcast. If you have any questions or thoughts or travel stories that you'd like us to feature on this podcast, you can find us on the web at thinplacespodcast.com. Just click the contact link and you can get in touch with us. You can also find me on Twitter at @TravelHags and on Facebook at facebook.com/thinplaces. If you'd like more information on our tours, you can visit our tour website at thinplacestour.com. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please give us a quick rating and review on iTunes and consider subscribing. In our next episode, our guest will be Tony Kirby from Heart of the Burren Tours, and we will be talking all about the Burren in Western Ireland. So long for now.
Thank you for listening, and please be sure to check out our tours to mystical sites at thinplacestour.com. The music for this podcast is Native Spirit, performed by Cheryl Ann Fulton from her collection, The Once and Future Harp. Goodbye for now, wishing you love and light and every blessing.